Dawn cracked over the prairie like a slow breath. The horizon bruised pink and gold. Frost clung to grass in thin, white whispers, and the shack squatted in the middle of it all, leaning against the wind as though it had grown tired of standing. Inside, the air held the stillness of a church before a funeral. Kerosene faint on the walls, the sour scent of boiled coffee left too long on the stove. Eliza sat in a straight-back chair beside the bed, her hands in her lap, the quilt drawn over the still shape beneath it. The outline of her mother's face was faint beneath the faded fabric, but Eliza's eyes stayed fixed on it, as if willing her to shift, to take one more breath. Jed lay curled on the floor in the corner, his small body buried in a wool blanket, his breath slow and even. He'd fallen asleep sometime after the rattling stopped, when the night wind had been the only sound left. The night had been long. Her mother's breaths had come ragged, shallow, each one like the scraping of wood on stone. Outside, the wind had hissed through the cracks in the wall, carrying with it the smell of frozen earth. When the last breath came, there had been no cry, no word, just silence and the hollow space it left behind. Eliza stood, her knees stiff, and tucked the quilt over her mother's face. The cloth was warm where it touched her skin. She pressed her palm there, the gesture less for her mother than for herself, and whispered so softly the words seemed to vanish into the air. "I'll keep him safe. I promise." The shack was bare before a chair, the bed, and the old stove in the corner. They had nothing left worth keeping but what they could carry. She opened the tobacco tin from the shelf and counted the coins, 13 cents, dull with wear. Into the satchel she placed a tin, 2 slices of bread wrapped in cloth, a leather-bound Bible, and her mother's hair comb with 3 teeth missing. Jed stirred when the satchel strap creaked. His hair stuck up in all directions, and his eyes were red-rimmed. "Where we going?" he asked, his voice thick with sleep. "Somewhere with walls stronger than the wind," she said. She didn't look at him when she said it, because she wasn't sure it was true. They stepped outside into the brittle cold, boots crunching frost. The prairie stretched in every direction, a sea of pale grass bending and whispering under the wind. Far off, the land rose and fell like waves frozen in place. There was no sound of other people, only the distant call of a crow and the faint creak of the shack's door swinging loose behind them. Eliza followed the wagon ruts leading east. The nearest town was a day's walk, maybe more if the weather turned. She kept Jed close, watching the sky. The sun was low but climbing, casting their shadows long across the frost. By noon, the warmth had begun to seep into the ground. Their boots left soft impressions in the thawing earth. They passed a half-buried wagon wheel, the wood gray and splintered. A mile later, they came upon an abandoned homestead. The roof had caved in on one side, and a door hung open on rusted hinges. Eliza saw the marks on the porch, dark, dried stains that needed no explanation. Jed tried to peer inside, but she caught his arm and pulled him forward. "We're not stopping here." "Why not?" "Because it's not ours," she said, though she wasn't sure whose it was anymore. They walked until the sky dimmed toward evening, the air turning sharp again. Eliza's legs burned, but she kept going until she spotted the black skeleton of a cottonwood tree standing alone in the grass. It would break some of the wind, enough for the night. They huddled under the branches, their backs to the trunk. Eliza divided the bread into halves and gave Jed his share. He ate slow, chewing in silence. She listened to the prairie, the far-off yipping of coyotes, the low groan of the wind passing over the plains. Above them, the stars came out one by one, cold and bright as new coins. "Do you think Pa's still alive?" Jed asked after a while. His voice was small, almost swallowed by the wind. Eliza didn't answer right away. "If he is, he ain't here," she said finally. Jed nodded, as if that settled it, though his eyes lingered on the dark horizon. He curled against her side, the blanket wrapped around them both. Eliza stayed awake long after he slept. She thought of the shack, the quilt, the promise she'd made. The land around them stretched out forever, silent and wide and unfeeling. She'd grown up hearing that the prairie made people hard. She wondered if it would break them before it did that. When she finally closed her eyes, she dreamed of footsteps outside their shelter, heavy and slow, circling in the dark. In the dream, she stood and looked, But the prairie was empty, only the grass swaying under moonlight. She woke before dawn, heart still quick, and for a moment she thought she'd heard it again. Footsteps, faint but deliberate. She looked out across the endless grass. There was nothing there but the wind, but she kept her hand on the satchel strap until the horizon began to glow. By noon the prairie was shimmering, the air quivering above the grass like heat off a forge. Eliza kept Jed close, his small hand tucked into hers. They had been walking since first light, and the weight of the satchel dug into her shoulder. Her eyes swept the horizon in slow, practiced arcs. The land was too open, too quiet. A shape appeared far off, wavering in the heat. Small at first, then taller, the glint of metal catching the sun. Jed slowed. "Somebody's coming," he said, his voice thin. The rider grew clearer with each hoofbeat. A tall man on a black gelding, dust rising in his wake, the brim of his hat pulled low. His coat was a long duster, sun-faded but clean. A rifle jutted from the saddle scabbard, the wood polished from use. He sat the horse like the saddle had been made for him, like the ground itself was his to ride. When he drew up 10 paces away, the horse snorted and shifted. The man didn't speak right off, just studied them, eyes pale as winter ice, unreadable. His gaze lingered on the satchel, then on Jed's too-thin frame. Eliza swallowed and forced her voice steady. "Our mama died this morning." She felt Jed flinch at the words, but she kept going. "We got nowhere to go." The man's face gave nothing away. A shadow from his hat brim cut across his jaw, hiding most of him but the eyes. When he finally spoke, his voice was low and even. "Then you're already home." He dismounted in a slow, deliberate motion, boots sinking into the dirt. Without asking, he took the satchel from her shoulder and slung it over his own, then lifted Jed onto the horse. "You ride," he told the boy. "Your sister and me'll walk." They moved together across the prairie, the horse's hooves making soft thuds in the grass. The man asked no questions and offered no explanations. Eliza kept pace beside him, glancing up now and then, but he didn't meet her eye again until the land began to change. Low hills rising, scattered fence posts tilting from years in the wind. By the time the ranch came into view, the sun was leaning west. It sprawled across a wide valley, weathered barns, a windmill turning slow, cattle scattered like brown shadows in the distance. Smoke curled from a chimney. The man led them through a wooden gate that creaked open on rusted hinges. A woman came out from the cookhouse, her hair tied back with a strip of cloth. She stopped when she saw the children, eyes narrowing. "You bring strays now," she said. Her voice was brisk, but not unkind. "They stay," the man said simply. The woman looked him over a moment longer before jerking her chin toward the door. "Get in." Stew still warm. Inside, the smell of beef and onions filled the air. They ate at a plain wooden table, the woman moving around them without fuss. Jed ate like he hadn't seen food in weeks. Eliza forced herself to eat slower, though each bite seemed to dissolve the knot in her chest. When they'd finished, the man took them out to the barn. The loft above the hay was theirs, he said. A narrow ladder led up to a small space smelling of dust and horses. But the boards were solid, the roof whole. It was the first place Eliza had been in months where the wind couldn't find her. Later, as the sky deepened toward night, she heard the low murmur of voices outside. She crept to the loft window, peering down. 2 ranch hands stood by the corral, one with a cigarette glowing between his fingers. "That man seemed more killing than most soldiers," the smoker said. The other spat into the dirt, and done his share of it. Eliza's gaze shifted to the man himself. He stood by the fence, the wind tugging at his coat, eyes scanning the dark hills like a hunter waiting for movement. Even in stillness, he seemed dangerous, like the quiet before a gunshot. That night Jed slept almost instantly, his breathing soft and even. Eliza lay awake, listening to the distant groan of the windmill and the creak of the barn settling. She thought about the man's words. "Then you're already home." Morning came with the cry of a rooster and the clank of metal in the yard. The man set her to mending a stretch of fence by the south pasture. He worked beside her for a while, showing her how to knot the wire tight, his instructions clipped but patient. His hands were calloused, the nails square and clean. Jed, meanwhile, had found a stray dog, thin, one ear torn, and was tossing its scraps from the cookhouse. The boys' laughter carried across the yard, quick and bright. Eliza realized she hadn't heard that sound since before Mama took sick. Midday, a lone rider came hard up the road. Dust rolled off his horse's flanks. He slid from the saddle, his face drawn. "They're close," he told the man. The man's posture shifted, almost imperceptibly. "Who?" "Red Creek boys. 5 of them. Rode past Turner's place 2 days ago. Heard they took a herd." The air between them seemed to tighten. The man's eyes narrowed just enough of the pale to turn sharp. "If they come here, there'll be no talking." The rider nodded once, mounted again, and was gone. Eliza stood a few paces off, pretending to work the fence, but she'd heard every word. The name meant nothing to her, but the tone had weight, like a door closing. She thought about the marks on that abandoned porch they'd passed, about the long look the man had given the horizon when they arrived. That night, the man stayed on the porch with a lantern burning low beside him, the rifle resting across his knees. The light cast his face in pieces. Jaw in shadow, eyes catching every flicker. Eliza watched from the loft, her brother asleep beside her. The wind was stronger than the night before, but for the first time in days, she didn't feel its cold reach her bones. She still didn't know his name, but she knew enough to understand something. Wherever they were, trouble was riding toward it, and the man who'd taken them and wasn't the kind to run. Days settled into a rhythm, though the air around the ranch seemed to hum with something unsaid. Eliza woke with the first light, helping in the cookhouse or riding out to the pastures. The man, still without a name in her mouth, taught her how to guide a horse with her knees, how to feel for a loose post before it gave way. His lessons were few in words but steady in presence, and she began to measure her mornings by the length of his shadow beside hers. Jed thrived under the wide sky. He fed calves with a grin that made him look younger than his 9 years, followed the ranch hands with tireless curiosity, and roamed as far as Eliza would allow. The stray dog became his shadow, tail wagging whenever the boy came near. One evening, she found herself alone by the cookhouse fire with a man. The flames flickered between them, catching the edges of his face. He didn't look at her when he spoke. "Some men ain't fit to be fathers," he said, his voice low, as if speaking to flames. "I've been both kinds." She didn't ask what he meant. The way of the words told her enough, that whatever had shaped him wasn't far behind him, and it hadn't been kind. The first hint of trouble came when Jed returned from the creek, pale-faced and silent. She knelt in front of him, hands on his shoulders. "What happened?" "I saw men," he whispered. "Up on the hill. Watching." She went straight to the man, who listened without interrupting. When Jed finished, he stood, walked to the barn, and began loading rifles with a calmness that made Eliza's skin prickle. That night, lanterns burned later than usual. The man stationed 2 ranch hands along the fence line, another at the windmill. He sat on the porch with his rifle across his lap, gaze fixed on the dark stretch beyond the corral. The hills didn't move, but they felt nearer somehow, pressing in. 3 days passed like that. Each one taught, every noise in the grass a reason to look twice. Eliza slept with her boots on and the satchel by her side. She dreamed of riders in the night, of fire licking through the barn, of Jed's voice calling her from somewhere she couldn't reach. Then, one morning before dawn, she woke to find the man gone. Panic knifed through her until she saw him returning at first light. Dust on his coat, eyes sharper than she'd seen them yet. He said nothing of where he'd been, but that day no one saw a single man on the hills. Later, the cook found Eliza by the corral and pressed something into her hand, her mother's comb. The broken tooth had been mended, though it sanded smooth. "He fixed it," the woman said simply before walking away. Eliza turned the comb over in her palm, feeling the neat repair. It was such a small thing, but it pressed against her ribs like a promise. Storm clouds rolled in 2 nights later, black and heavy, dragging lightning in their wake. Rain hammered the roof, wind rattled the shutters. Eliza sat in the loft with Jed, counting the seconds between the flash and the thunder. In the pauses, she swore she heard something else. Faint but deliberate, like hoofbeats carrying through the wet night. She rose and crept to the window. The yard was a blur of rain and shadow. The windmill spun in a frenzy, groaning on its axis. At the far edge of the fence, the lantern by the gate swung on its hook, the light jerking with each gust. The sound came again, closer this time. Jed stirred, mumbling in his sleep, but Eliza kept her eyes on the darkness beyond the gate. She couldn't see shapes yet, but her gut told her they were out there, waiting for the rain to cover their approach. She stayed at the window long enough for her breath to cloud the glass, the storm still building. Somewhere outside, she knew the man was watching too, seeing what she saw, readying himself for the thing that was coming. When she lay back down, she didn't sleep. The storm wasn't going to break that night. It was only beginning to gather. The night, they came as black as cold dust, the storm from days past leaving the ground slick and the air heavy. The dogs went first, low growls that swelled into sharp barks, pulling Eliza from the half-sleep she'd been pretending to keep. Jed stirred beside her, but she pressed a hand to his chest. "Stay down," she whispered. From the loft window, she saw them. 5 riders easing to the rain, their shapes breaking in and out of shadow. The Red Creek boys. She didn't need the name to know. The way they moved told her. Careful, hungry, certain. A figure stepped out from the porch, lantern light cutting across him. The man stood easy, but there was no looseness in him. Shotgun in one hand, voice carrying low and clear. "You boys picked the wrong gate." For a moment, the only sound was the wind through wet grass. Then the first shot cracked the night wide open. Muzzle flashes lit the yard like lightning. The smell of gunpowder clawed at the air. Eliza ducked as a round punched through the barn wall, splinters snapping past her cheek. Jed clung to her arm, eyes wide. The straw underfoot shifted as she scrambled toward the ladder. She didn't think, didn't plan, only knew the barn door stood wide, the hay bales dry, and the Red Creek boys close enough to burn it all to the ground. She hit the dirt running, rain in her face, mud sucking at her boots. Bullets hissed past. A man on horseback wheeled toward her, torch in hand, but she dropped to a knee and scooped water from a barrel, flinging it hard at the flame. The torch sputtered, died, and in that breath she saw the man's surprise. The rancher, her rancher now, whether she'd said it aloud or not, was a shape of motion on the porch, the shotgun barking, dropping to before they crossed the yard. A round took him in the shoulder, spinning him, but he caught himself on the rail and drew his Colt in the same breath. One of the riders dismounted, stalking toward him with a grin that showed broken teeth. Eliza didn't think. She ran to the porch, saw the rancher's pistol drop from his hand, and snatched it up. The weight was heavier than she expected, but her hands didn't shake. She fired once, the crack deafening, and the man fell back into mud, the grin gone. Thunder rolled over them, close and deep. The last of the gang, the one who had to be their leader, was already in the yard, revolver empty, rain sliding off his hat brim. He and the rancher faced each other in the muck, both weapons useless now. They closed the distance like wolves, fists and elbows and knees in the dark. The man was younger, quicker, but the rancher fought like someone who'd done it too often to lose. Blood mixed with rain as they crashed into the fence, with splitting under their weight. Eliza could only watch, every muscle tight, as the fight turned brutal, mud and breath and bone on bone. It ended with a sharp, wet sound, the leader's body going slack. The rancher let him drop, chest heaving, eyes scanning the yard until he was sure it was over. The rain softened, the night giving way to a pale line on the horizon. The dead were dragged to the edge of the property, their shapes fading into the wet grass. Cattle settled again, the dogs quieting, the air thick with the smell of rain and spent powder. The rancher sat on the porch steps, shirt dark with blood at the shoulder. Eliza knelt beside him, pressing cloth to the wound while Jed hovered close, silent for once. He didn't look at her when he spoke, just out at the open prairie. "Guess I'm keeping you too." Something loosened in her chest then, something she'd been holding since the morning under the frost-bitten sky. She didn't thank him, not with words. She just kept her hand steady against the cloth, knowing this was home now, as sure as the sunrise creeping over the land. The light came slow and gold, spilling across the yard, turning the wet grass into a field of fire. 3 figures sat in that glow, man, girl, boy, silhouettes against the day. The wind moved gentle through the fence line. The prairie, for once, felt like it was keeping them, not testing them. And out there, past the hills, Eliza knew there were more storms, more riders, more nights that would ask too much of them. But they would face them together. She could feel it in the way the rancher sat forward, in the way Jed leaned into her side, in the way the horizon no longer felt like an ending, but the start of something they'd fight to hold. The day had only just begun.